podcast brought to you by the Women in Psychedelics Network. I'm your host, Kaya Roman, and today I am so psyched and honored to have Lorien Chavez from the Chacruna Institute with me, and very excited about this conversation. Let me tell you about this beautiful young woman. She is so inspiring. Lorien Chavez is the Development and Operations Officer for the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. And I'm sure many of our listeners have heard about the Chacruna Institute, but we're going to learn more about what you guys do. So your name comes up at least once a day, so I'm very excited for this. Lorien, as the Development and Operations Officer for the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, is currently based out of my home state of New Mexico. She's studied neuropsychology and biology for the past 6 years and is passionate about the use of sacred plant medicines as a tool for generational epigenetic healing, which is so needed in our world. So we're going to get into some more details about you, Lorien, but I want to start by just your journey and how did you find your way to the Chacruna Institute?
Sure. Well, what a sweet introduction. And I am so thrilled to be here having this conversation with you, Kaya. Thank you so much for the invitation. So my story is slightly unique, but also I feel like the more stories I hear, the more that it seems like we all have more similarities than differences of how we found our way to this work. So for me, it was very apparent from a pretty young age that regardless of what I was going to be doing, that I would spend my life in service to the plants. I had a very privileged childhood in the sense that I got to grow up playing in the dirt, and I got to grow up in different gardens, surrounded by herbalists and spiritual practitioners. And the older I get, the more I realize what a rich gift that was. And so I spent my time learning about the power and wisdom that exists with all of these plants, how to cultivate a positive relationship with my medicines. And there was a big emphasis growing up on the importance of reciprocity and respect with these practices. And so when I reached my teenage years and started having my own psychedelic journeys, it became really, really clear to me that I was really interested in like the juicy mechanics of like, what is happening in our brains, what is happening with the transformations in our nervous systems. And then I was very lucky to be very young in finding this work. And so a lot of research already existed. So when I went looking, unlike a lot of my like older mentors that really had to pave the way for all of this work to be created, there was already an abundance of like, here's what epigenetics is, here's what ancestral trauma is. And so I give a lot of credit to the people here before me that I was able to sort of get a jump start with that language, at least. And so I decided on a path of neuropsychology and epigenetics and became really fascinated in biology and psychology. And so I did my undergrad degree in that and knew that I wanted it to sort of be my precursor to this medicine work. And yeah, I mean, how lucky, truly.
So lucky to have figured this out at a young age.
I know. And I know that I won't know how privileged I am until I'm much older and able to look back. But I have deep, deep gratitude for the people that I was surrounded with, and the encouragement that I got is very rare, I'm finding, and has really been such a beneficial part of this journey. And so then after graduation, I found the Chacruna Institute, and they sort of found me, and spirit brought us together, and it was very meant to be. And I was a big fan. I still am a big fan, even after working with them for quite some time. I just get so giddy that I get to do this work with so many academic geniuses, with so many people that have really chosen a path of authenticity in this work. You know, like I know that there's growing realizations about how this work is becoming very pharmaceuticalized, ironically, and very politicized and very, you know, sort of extractivist. And Chacruna is one of the only entities, one of the bigger entities that is really remaining authentic, remaining true to their grassroots nature. And I still say they because I'm still, you know, a fan, and it's such a privilege to be able to walk this path with them. And so that's pretty much it. I think, similar to a lot of people, when you go into these big journeys with plant medicine and these psychedelic experiences, there's this big, like, what next? Like, what now? You get all of these downloaded messages. You like open up all of these like possible questions that you might want to answer. And for me and a lot of people, the very clear answer was now it's service to the plant. And so I will be spending the rest of my life trying to advocate for these plants.
Wow. What a
Yeah.
beautiful introduction. Thank you, Lorien.
Thank
You're
you.
you're incredible, and I love that you said your childhood was privileged because you got to play in the dirt. And
Truly. Not in a lot of other
like
ways, but
yeah,
truly.
no, but it's so true. Like
Mm-hmm.
kids today don't actually have that experience as much as they did, when I was a kid before
Mm-hmm.
the internet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing to see someone find these plants and find this passion. And you said you had your first psychedelic experience in your teenage years. So we're gonna get back to that, but
Sure.
I want to, I want to actually hear, like, for our listeners who maybe have heard about the Chacruna Institute but don't really know what you guys do. Maybe you could just tell us, first of all, the origin
Yeah.
story. How did the Chacruna Institute get started, and what do you guys do?
Absolutely. I could take up the whole podcast just bragging on the institute itself and our co-founder, main founder, Bia Labache, who is a very brilliant Brazilian anthropologist who started this work. I hope I'm not saying this wrong, about 25 years ago, when she's been drinking ayahuasca for longer than I've been alive. And she really became passionate about the protection of these plants, reminding people that these are spirits in a very real way, that these plants have autonomy, that they deserve respect. And she spent a lot of time in different parts of the global south before bringing all of that information up to the global north and trying to bring an authentic sense to this community. And so I give her a lot of credit to the sort of astronomical like jump that we've seen within this industry in the past, I would say even just 5 years. Obviously, there's been a steady incline for the past 20 years or so, but she has been such an instrumental part of reminding people of what's been lost and the importance of the upliftment of queer people. Notice my shirt that you can get in our store from our conference from Queering
Nice.
Psychedelics. People of color and specifically indigenous people who have been doing this work the longest and are not only losing traction and being able to share their story and their wisdom, but also, if we want to get into a conversation about access and everything as the world is growing today, it's a really important piece. And so she started the Chacruna Institute in a basement and really was just wanting to create articles and write pieces and publish works that really encouraged people to read and learn and maybe get a different idea about, instead of like psychedelics and all of these things, plant medicines and these more deeply rooted concepts of reciprocity. And so now the Chacruna Institute is a very well-established 501c3 nonprofit, but we are still very grassroots by nature. I have never been part of an organization with more integrity when it comes to really walking this path. All of these businesses are popping up and getting millions and millions, and it's no surprise to anyone that the smaller, more grassroots organizations are still struggling in these times. And even with that, I mean, so much credit to our team and our leadership of absolute geniuses. We create conferences, community forums at least twice a month with different experts in the field, from ethnobotanists to neuroscientists to like we have many lawyers on our team that are great resources for the very fast-paced changes that we're seeing in the federal legislation and on state levels. And so we have a couple courses that happen throughout the year. A couple have already passed, but we still have some coming up. And they're really amazing opportunities for people to tap into this more scientific realm of psychedelics without losing this very integral and wise indigenous piece and cultural relevance that I think needs to be at the forefront of all of these conversations. We also established the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative led by Joseph Mays. And it's been this amazing way to sort of put our money where our mouth is of like decolonizing reciprocity in terms of like making sure that the money goes straight to the communities, and instead of making them have to pitch to us or making them have to prove themselves to be able to get these funds, which is oftentimes what you're seeing with this sort of like trickle down effect. We make really personal relationships with multiple different organizations all over the globe to make sure that they're really receiving everything that they deserve, and they have the autonomy to be able to provide their communities with what they know that they need.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah.
It seems like, you guys are focused on a few different areas. There's education, there's research, there's reciprocity. Let's talk about the reciprocity piece.
Let's.
Maybe we should even just define reciprocity and um, what that means and why is that relevant? I think a lot of people are coming to psychedelics newly now. They maybe don't even know about the long thousands and thousands of years of
Mm-hmm.
indigenous history with these plant medicines. So let's talk about, yeah, what that is and why that's important.
Absolutely. Thank you for stopping there. And I really encourage everyone to check out our Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative. There's so much good information on the website. There's so many good tunnels that sort of lead you to information that was made by Indigenous people. And I definitely want to make sure that everyone's very aware that my expertise is limited, and I am a student here, and I'm so, so privileged to be able to share the lessons that I'm learning right now with everyone else. That's just important to me as I'm 23 and not an elder. I'm not Indigenous, and that feels important to state. But reciprocity, like I think most people know, is about give and take. And it's become, unfortunately, quite a buzzword right now, as everyone is sort of, some people are using it as authentic modes of action, and some people are using it as a sort of like clickbait to get people to feel like they're on the right side as this field sort of becomes divided in all of these different directions, right?
Right.
And reciprocity in nature should be, as Indigenous people see it, about giving first. You plant the plant first, and then you take. And when we're talking about giving and receiving, oftentimes we, take in the experience first, and then we're like, okay, how much am I willing to give back now? And I really encourage everyone to sort of think about the timeline for the reciprocal actions of, being able, especially when it comes to these plant medicines and when it comes to conservation work and when it comes to anything involving Mother Earth, to give first and then to notice how much more you receive when you do it that way. And so there's a couple different kinds of reciprocity, and I encourage everyone to sort of think about their capacities and the ways that they're able to really show up in this work. For me, it's like I don't have money. I have my body, and I can work, and I can, put my actual energetic source towards the mission that I really believe in. And for other people, they are busy. That's like the world that we live in, and they can't do that. But they do have money, and money within this field is really difficult to talk about, I think, because money and spirituality seem like this total antithesis that don't go together. And in concept, I actually think the same. I always have had sort of weird problems with money, and I think it's very funny that Spirit led me to a development job. But I've come to truly, but I've really come to understand that money is a unit of energy, that it's simply like a unit of energy that we can make into a good or bad impact. And the world that we live in is already set up in this capitalistic way. And until we really make that huge systemic change, which we're not going to see in one single lifetime, we really need to be more thoughtful about like what we are really endorsing with the money that we do have. What are we really allowing to stick around, and what are we allowing to sort of fade out because they don't have the funds to exist anymore? And especially when it comes to Indigenous communities, to plant conservation initiatives, they need money, unfortunately. Like it's just the reality that we're living in. And so I encourage everyone to think about, like if you don't have money to put your body into an initiative that you really believe in and use your energy that way. And if you do have money, to strongly consider where you're putting it, and what you want to see tomorrow look like, and what organizations need to exist for that tomorrow to become a reality. So that's reciprocity to me. I could go off on a tangent on every question that you ask. I apologize.
Oh, wow. No, that was a really beautiful description. And I love thinking about money as energy. Of course, everything is energy. And so where are we directing that energy? And so I'm curious, how do you guys decide where to direct that money energy when you receive donations to your nonprofit? How have you determined, there's a lot of tribes in the Amazon, unfortunately, several years ago suffered devastating fires. And, there's just so many wisdom keepers all over the world that could use support. How do you decide who to channel that to?
It's a really good question. And it's a very thoughtful process that happens between Joseph Mays, who is our program director, a couple of his mentors, and of course Bia Labache, who really put in the extra work to build these like personal relationships to where Joseph has received beautiful gifts from the tribes and organizations that we've helped, and there's a bit of a rotation between organizations that qualify for our pipeline services and then organizations that are even willing to accept that platform or that help. And so I encourage everyone to donate a little bit so that we can like expand the amount of organizations that we're able to get our hands on, and hopefully make it a very prominent initiative in everyone's minds so that more and more people can be helped every year.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about something that you mentioned about how, psychedelics have be a large focus is like the legal landscape and the pharmaceutical landscape, which is just, it's such an interesting time. As a journalist, I'm just like watching it with so
Mm-hmm.
much fascination of all the different perspectives and all the different people that are getting involved, and everyone's agendas or passions or reasons behind why they're doing what they're doing within psychedelics. There's everything you can imagine, a
Mm-hmm.
very big spectrum of all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things, kind of like, from indigenous people that you're working with in the jungle that are growing plants and brewing ayahuasca using, methods passed down for thousands of years, all the way to synthetic molecules that are made in a lab that are mirror molecules of plant medicines but have no plant material, require planting nothing in the ground, can be reproduced over and over and over again quite inexpensively, and are going through FDA approval to be a prescription medication. And of course, there's then all the research of like, well, can people get the same benefit from this thing that's being made in a lab as they can from a ceremony in the jungle? Of course, it's not the same experience, but then there's all this, what's happening in the brain, and how are we like actually helping people heal? So as this all plays out in this very interesting way, I wonder if Chacruna has a kind of opinion or stance on the pharmacological direction of psychedelics. And what is the feeling? Because I know that part of your initiatives are to save plants. Like iboga, for example, in Africa is an endangered species and a very difficult plant to grow. And there's a lot of fake iboga, and and then the tribes that grow ayahuasca in the jungle, that whole tradition needs to be protected. But then what if we can just create those molecules in a lab? Like, then what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
Some may say. So I'm just wondering if Chacruna has a stance on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I want to be careful about like speaking for the organization as a whole, because as things change and different perspectives get brought up, I think like an organizational opinion sort of is fluid, right? Depending on like the conservation efforts that we're seeing and the different studies that are being proposed. I think it can be pretty variable. And so, but I will speak from my personal opinion, and I think that there's a place for everything, but I think that, like, caution is definitely needed. I've heard this, like, sort of like global narrative that, like, the pendulum is really swinging this other direction and that we're all really excited about it. And a quote that I heard from my old boss, who is just so genius, is the pendulum swings to extremes until it finds its place in the middle. And we have already historically witnessed this huge pendulum swing of, like, extreme, like, drug war and suppression of these plants, and like big cultural shutdown. And now we're seeing this huge pendulum shift to, like, these are some of the most valuable investments you can make, and all of these, like, pharmaceutical studies from, like, the biggest universities are getting approved, and it's really beautiful to watch. But I encourage everyone to think about that extreme and all of the things that could come from that before we find our place in the middle. And there's a certain amount of caution that needs to be had if we're going to really be satisfied with that place in the middle. And what I can see sort of happening is conservation problems, is legalization problems, and access problems that aren't putting the right people at the forefront of receiving these medicines, who historically have been the victims of the oppression that we saw on this side of the pendulum swing. And I think when it comes to these more so, like, conservation issues, then I do think that there's a good place in the pharmaceutical world for these more synthetic, man-made substances like LSD or MDMA, and the trials happening with MAPS and Johns Hopkins, I think is really positive, because when we're looking at a more clinical setting, again, this is completely personal opinion, it might be more extractivist to take these really sacred plant medicines that are meant for historical relevancy, that are meant for ceremonial use, that are meant for these big, respectful processes that really allow the plant to come to its full spirit. That it might, be more appropriate for these synthetic things to be used for a more pharmaceutical realm. That makes sense to me. However, I do want to say that as these things are gaining more traction, obviously we're going to see both the synthetic and non-synthetic, both the pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical models gaining traction. And we've already seen within the past 20 years a huge ayahuasca tourism boom down in Peru and Brazil, and people wanting that enlightenment. And what I will say is that like, everyone deserves healing. Everyone is traumatized just from living in this world, unfortunately, and everyone deserves that deep, deep healing. And it's not dissimilar to what we saw with Maria Sabina and everyone going down to Mexico wanting, with the best intentions, this healing. And I just encourage people to have a little bit of thoughtfulness about the big picture and the global, like, mark that we might have on the world, from everyone, shuffling down and wanting this healing for themselves. And although everyone deserves it, if we have too much of a boom and the pendulum swings too far this way, by the time we settle in the middle, there's not going to be any plants left. The plants might get mad at us. Like I said, they have autonomy. And if we're just, like, pulling and extracting and trying to heal our whole collective in a way that's actually harming Mother Earth, well, that's not healing the collective. That's still very much individualistic, self-healing modality instead of this community collective consciousness healing that we're really looking for. And protection of Mother Earth is part of that collective healing. And so I just don't want us to lose sight of that.
Wow. Beautifully said.
Oh, thank you.
I love that image of the pendulum. And, when I think about, you're talking about this drug war, and, like, I grew up in the, just say no, and this is your brain on drugs with the egg frying and that whole time. And now, now to this time. And, like, I think about I have two teenage kids, but I often have, up to 8 of them here in my house. And I think about that generation and how they're like, oh, wow, psychedelics, like, that's, like, good for depression and stuff. I'm like, how do you guys know this? That's so cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you should consider a career in this field, So I think about that pendulum swing, and I think about where is it going to land in the middle. And it's really with young people. It's really with this next generation that's coming forward in this new paradigm where the science is showing how much these medicines can heal, and the stigma is breaking. And so, as a 23-year-old who found this medicine early, what advice do you have for young people to get into this work?
Um, well, I have so much, but again, I always want to be careful about giving advice as a mentor, and I hope that this is taken as advice as a peer. I love being a student, and I encourage everyone to sort of sit in their studentship as long as they can. This field in particular is, I say this with love, is full of experts, and everyone's an expert on everything. And it's a very interesting thing to see within this like academic plant medicine world, where I would say like sometimes the two biggest egos that we see are these academic egos and people who sit with medicine, and instead of, you know, becoming so humbled and becoming like being like, oh my gosh, I'm so small and everything else is so big, they're like, oh, like I have seen things that other people have never seen. Like I've had thoughts that no one else has ever thought. And it's very easy, counter to popular belief that these are ego eradicating drugs, for your ego to actually get built up by the fact that you have access to this sacred knowledge. And you start thinking that that knowledge is your own instead of this like this sacred knowledge that has existed for quite some time. And you know, it's very easy to sort of get to a space, especially when you're young. And it's something that I have to dismantle all the time because it's very difficult for me to have patience and ambition live in my body simultaneously. And especially when you consider this your career, there's this sort of push to, you know, like, oh, well, I have to make this a career and I have to sign up for all of these things and I have to like, you know, push my way to the front of the pedestal. Or to the front of the stage. And I encourage everyone to meditate, first of all, and really try to remember those lessons from the plants that you get that very quickly leave if you don't do the integration process in a good way. And to remember that, you know, this is not a regular career, that this does take patience and this does take humility, and it should, and that and to try not to speak over the people that you're trying to speak for. You know, it's advocacy work is so important. And again, these are all lessons that I'm trying to remind myself of, and I'm never going to do a perfect job. And so I also encourage people to have patience and forgiveness with themselves, that they're young and their ego's a little inflated because they're young, and that's just how it goes. But to truly take a moment every time you're asked to speak and say, am I the one that should be speaking on this? Are there other people that could speak on this that have, you know, lived experience that can step into the spotlight and really be able to shine? And I also encourage people to think about the stages that they're creating. And so if you are in a more like power-driven place where you're able to create these platforms, to really think about, you know, like obviously we want more representation, but there's a very fine line between tokenization and representation. And to really make sure like we are creating a safe space for these voices that have been marginalized for so long, they haven't spoken up because it wasn't safe to. And so creating a safe stage and then asking them to come and share their voice is really powerful.
Wow. Lorien Chavez, so wise beyond your years.
Not at
Thank
all.
you.
This is a good
Thank
time
you
to shout
so
out all of my
much.
mentors and people that put this voice inside of me. I encourage everyone to find as good of a mentor as Bia Labache, because she's the best.
Well, on that note, please let us know, how can we find out more about the Chacruna Institute? How can people get involved, and how can people follow along on your journey?
Absolutely. Well, we do as much as we can to be as accessible as possible with the very limited budget that we have. And so if you're interested in accessing all of our resources, but you don't have a whole lot of money, we do have a membership system, which is very purposefully created to make sure that everyone can get access to all that we do for like no money. And it's a little ridiculous that more people don't know about it. And so on Patreon, for only like $5 a month, you can get access to hundreds of archived lectures by experts in the field. You can get free access
Great.
to our conferences. You can get access to our courses. And if you're interested in expanding on your education in that way, I really encourage people to check out our courses. We have a couple coming up just this month. And other than that, pretty much everything that you can find is on chacruna.net. We try to be really accessible, very friendly and approachable. And so we're at almost every conference across the globe. And if you can find us at a table, we love to talk to you.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you
Mm-hmm.
so much for taking the time to
Thank
speak with
you,
us
Kaya.
today. Thank you so much for your beautiful heart and your dedication to this work and to healing. And I look forward to seeing you at an event very soon.
Thank you, Kaya. You are so sweet. This was such a privilege for me. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye bye.